Good day, and welcome to Iran's Weekly Wraps. I'm Viv Governor, and as usual, we'll start off with a macro segment and then end with a bit on AI/tech. So let's just start off with the macro. We're going to discuss this week the Japanese, pullback at the start of the week, as well as what it means for the global economy and what that could mean for markets as well. After we saw global markets also pull back, and that'll be kind of added onto the segment. Then we have to discuss the tensions that are occurring in Israel and in Iran, as well as Ukraine and Russia, and how that's going to impact the world, as well as what's been happening in places like Venezuela. And then in our AI segment, we're going to focus on OpenAI, which we haven't talked about in a while, but there's been some big developments over the last last few days especially. Changes in personnel, weird pictures of strawberries, etc. So let's start off just by looking at global tensions. Okay, so Israel conducted a major attack against Iran and killed which was the leader of Hamas in Iran, in one of those really crazy kind of spy operations that Israel is almost uniquely capable of doing. What they did was they put a bomb in a room that they knew this guy might come to one day, and then they waited like months until he actually turned up in the room, and then they blew the room up. That is the thing they've done. I mean, if you consider some of the other things they've done in the past, for instance, when they wanted to infect the Iranian nuclear system, what they did was they released a virus into the entire world and just waited till the virus basically spread everywhere. And then just by luck, some guy with a flash drive infected with the virus used it in the right facility, and then they were notified about it and via the virus, and they blew the facility up. This is the kind of stuff that Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, does quite often. But what it's resulted in is, firstly, a big blowback from Iran. Why? Because for a couple of things. Obviously, attacking a guest in the middle of Iran is usually not a thing that the countries will take very lightly. But I think it's exacerbated by the fact that the president is quite new. He's obviously, replaced the previous president who died in that helicopter crash, and in that situation, you want to be showing a bit of strength. You don't want to be looking at the weak successor. If you came into power in a strange way, you want to be sure that you are deserving of that power. And I think that might be one of the reasons we could be seeing a bit of an uptick there. We've seen people like, for instance, senior Israeli ministers, etc., going to shelters. We've seen the UK, for instance, talk about evacuating from Lebanon, because that's also going to be up front in this particular war, because Israel didn't just attack Iran, they also attacked Lebanon as well. And so, I think that is a bit of an uptick. There's nothing that's occurred in the last few days or so has been an incursion by Ukraine into Russia in the Kursk region. Apparently, they've got a nuclear power plant. We're talking about 1,000+ soldiers. That's the kind of numbers being talked about. This obviously is something that Ukraine probably needs to do in order to win the war. You can't just basically be sitting on your own territory, getting attacked, not trying to attack your opponent in his own territory. But the problem is that most of Ukraine's weaponry comes from outside of Ukraine, and pretty much everybody that supplies Ukraine weaponry doesn't want Ukraine to use that weaponry in Russia. So let's just see how that turns out there. But what it's resulted in is an uptick in gas prices, natural gas prices, and an increase in uncertainty in terms of the whole petrochemical market. Then moving on to the situation in Japan, we've had a big pullback in the Japanese market. At the start of the week, it's recovered a little bit since then, but that pullback was associated with a strong strengthening of the currency. The yen became a lot stronger because of central bank interventions to strengthen the yen. Now, why did they do that? Because the yen has weakened dramatically, it went to 160 plus. The reason for this is pretty simple. The Japanese have borrowed too much money, and they're not growing fast enough to make it likely they're going to repay that money. They have a huge amount of old people compared to the young people. They have a declining population because of the lack of fertility, which means that in the future there's going to be fewer people working in Japan than there are right now. But at the same time, the number of old people is probably going to go up. So you have more old people than followed by fewer young people. That's not the recipe for financial stability. And what's happened is that people have seen that internationally, and they've stopped buying Japanese yen, and that's obviously weakened the yen because people don't think it's going to be as stable as another currency, for instance, like the dollar, in the future. So the yen weakened, and then because the yen weakened, it made all Japanese stocks look a little stronger, because these companies often sell things internationally. Like Toyota sells stuff everywhere in the world, Sony sells stuff everywhere in the world, and when the yen is weaker, the amount of yen they get for the stuff they sell goes up. Now, after the Japanese Reserve Bank intervened and strengthened the yen from about 160 to about the low 140s, we saw a big pullback in some of these companies because for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the fact that we are seeing this incredible amount of benefit that these companies are getting because of the weaker currency that gets reversed. Also, I mean, whatever valuations you have in these currencies, internationally, are going to be affected by the yen strengthening. The yen strengthening probably is something that also cannot be maintained long term. Looking at, like, for instance, George Soros, when he took on the Bank of England and beat them and made $1 billion in a day, it's been proven that, central banks can intervene for a short period of time, but the yen is going to weaken over time unless we see an underlying fundamental change in that economy where you have more workers or you have more productivity or you have something happening. I think that the yen's long-term situation doesn't look good. But in the short term, they managed to strengthen by about 20 yen, caused markets to get a bit of a panic, and that caused international markets also to fall down a bit. Now, the one thing I want to note here is that the Japanese economy has kind of been flattish for 30 years. Yes, we may be heading towards a crisis for them, but the fact of the matter is that they've lost importance over the last 30 years or so. And in fact, I think by some measures they are now smaller than the German economy. And so we're talking about falling from second all the way down to fourth place. First is still the US, second is China, but those may say China is overtaking the US, but either way, 1 and 2 is China and the US. And now I think possibly Germany is going to be there as well. And in a few years' time, India is going to overtake Japan definitely because their growth rates are just significantly better than Japan is. So Japan has a problem, has a big issue. But fortunately for the rest of the world is that they are not as important as they once were. Therefore, the impact could be quite muted in terms of what's going to be happening to global markets. That being said, markets did, like I say, fall. Partly, I think, is just profit taking. But one thing I want to point out is this. We're talking about a world in which interest rates are in excess of 5% in the US. And we're talking about markets falling significantly on some really minor news. I mean, they've got the Germany situation there. But we also could be talking about the fact that we saw a slight underperformance in the US job market. The US jobs numbers came in last week and they were slightly weaker than expected. And people are thinking there's possibly a recession. Now, just compare that situation to what we saw in 2008 or in COVID. These are nothings. And in both those situations, with 2008 and with the COVID crisis, it is pretty clear that if the Reserve Bank decides to loosen interest rates and really pump money into the system, markets are going to go higher. Is it enough for them to do that this time around? I don't know. But I do know that if this does turn into a huge crisis, a huge impact on the global economy, I don't think that this is going to be something that's beyond the scope of the central banks to handle, because they've proven quite ably over the last, let's say, 15, 16 years or so, that they are really capable of handling a financial crisis of this scope just by printing more money, just by flooding the system with money, because that's going to basically translate into higher stock markets, people buying more stuff and giving the general overall economy a kind of a boost. Okay, so yeah, that is my 2 cents here. The Japanese situation probably bad, probably getting worse, but I don't think we are going to be in a situation where global markets have to be affected by this, because central banks clearly have the ability to kind of buffer us against this particular kind of danger. And then we get to OpenAI. So there's a couple of things happened in OpenAI over the last week or so. Firstly, we have Greg Brockman, the guy that basically runs the company, after Sam Altman, saying he's going to get sabbatical for a few months till the end of the year. And then the second thing we had was Sam Altman posted a picture of some strawberries. Okay. For those that know, strawberries obviously mean that it's the next version of this LLM thing. Some people are calling it Q-Stone, some people are calling it strawberries, but strawberry rather. But it seems to be a different kind of architecture, or some adjustment to the architecture that really improves the performance of these AI models. And the fact that he's saying, I think the picture was a bunch of strawberries, and he said he loves strawberries in summer. Summer in the northern hemisphere is now. If he says he loves strawberries in summer, is he indicating that he wants to release the strawberry platform in the next few months? Now, look, this is very speculative. We're bringing this all off a statement saying, I love strawberries in summer, and a picture of strawberries. But it's been quite clear that these guys do these kind of things. They do try and have humorous ways of releasing important models. And I do think that the fact that they've lost the kind of the top dog status in LLMs, firstly to Claude, then to Llama, and now possibly to Gemini. So the last few periods, we've seen Llama beat OpenAI stuff. We've seen Claude beat OpenAI stuff, and now we've seen Gemini beating some of OpenAI stuff as well. OpenAI, to maintain its perceived dominance in the division, has to come out with something that's spectacular to kind of maintain its kind of lead over its competitors out there. Now, in terms of Greg Brockman deciding to take on sabbatical, there's two ways to look at it. Firstly, a lot of people that have been under Sam Altman have left. Maybe he's a bad boss, maybe people have been paid too much money, they don't really care about the future, but I don't think that's the case. I do think, however, that in terms of this particular move, it's not a guarantee that this is like a negative for the company. The fact that he's saying, I want to come back say by the end of the year, could indicate that we can expect something important from them by the end of the year. You all know how these models are trained. They do this huge training run, and then they go into reinforcement learning. The training run is probably the more technical, complicated part of it. And once you've done the training run, the reinforcement learning should be a simpler, task. People just sit down and kind of look at the stuff and say, this is good, that's bad. In that scenario, I don't think it's needed for a really top-notch CEO to be around to make sure that the company is running, at the full capacity. You've done the major thing, now you're doing the light thing. When it does get released, then we're probably going to have an uptick again in terms of how much work you have to do. And so it kind of makes sense before this new models are released that you take a few months off to just get to de-stress or whatever. And I think that's probably what's happening here. I don't see any evidence that we're seeing a huge drop down in terms of the quality of our people. I don't see in terms of what's been happening at OpenAI as being a case of the company losing focus. They seem to be still quite focused on AI. They seem to be still quite focused on getting the new models out there. And I talked about the fact that you see other models kind of beating them, which is often. But we do also find another trend. When another model beats OpenAI's model, it comes out with something new reasonably soon thereafter. Maybe showing that it's not showing everything it can to the market at the moment, and often only releases stuff when it's kind of forced to by competitors catching up or exceeding it. Okay, so make of that what you will, but I think the current timelines still kind of hold. We probably will get GPT-5 after the election in the US. I don't have any reason to suspect it won't be at least matching some level of hype that we've seen out there. It will be significantly better than GPT-4. I think it will be maybe not as much better as GPT-4 was to GPT-3 or 3 was to 2, but it's going to be enough that we're going to notice it. I think it's going to open up a huge new category of tasks it could do that could be profitable long term. And like I said, I think that Greg Brockman kind of going on sabbatical for a few months doesn't really say anything negative about this particular case, unless you believe that he really wants to be holding a guitar, or doing some kind of cheerleading kind of thing to what's happening right now. I don't think it's going to be really important for him to be around at this point. But it will be important for him to be back, when the new model is released, to basically try and give some kind of guidance to the company to negotiate what's going to be its impact on the global economy. Okay, so that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.